My suitcase was already checked. The boarding pass for my flight to Seattle, where I was to meet my first grandchild, was a crisp, hopeful rectangle in my coat pocket. But as my taxi idled at the curb of our Beacon Hill brownstone, a sudden, inexplicable dread washed over me. I had forgotten it. The original Will Richards' will, not the notarized copy in the desk, but the true original. The one with his handwritten annotations in the margins. The one I suddenly felt I could not leave behind. "Just 5 minutes," I told the driver, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I let myself in through the heavy oak door. The air inside was still, unnaturally so. I didn't call out my son's name, Leo. Something held my tongue. A profound silence had settled over the house, the kind that precedes a storm. I moved down the long hallway, my sensible shoes making no sound on the antique Persian runner, and then I heard them. Voices from the library, low, clinical, and conspiratorial. I pressed myself into the shadows of the arched doorway, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "If she's exhibiting clear signs of cognitive slippage, we can make the case," a voice said. A voice I didn't recognize. Sharp, authoritative. "She's 74, Davies," my son Leo replied. "My only child. She's sharp as a tack most days." "Sharpness is subjective, Leo," the lawyer Davies countered smoothly. "Forgetfulness, repetition, difficulty managing complex financial matters. These are objective markers. With the right documentation, a petition for guardianship isn't difficult to push through. For her own protection, of course." Guardianship. The word landed in the silent hallway like a stone. They were talking about me, about containing me. "I've already started a log," Leo continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "She's been misplacing her reading glasses constantly. She told me the same story about Dad's research trip twice last week, and she hasn't even looked at the quarterly tax estimates I prepared for her." A wave of nausea rolled over me. I wanted to storm into the room, to see the look on my son's face when he realized his betrayal had been overheard. But a cold archivist's instinct took over. I backed away, my steps measured and silent, every nerve ending screaming. The floorboards did not betray me. Outside, the late autumn sun was bright, but a glacier was forming in my chest. I got back into the waiting taxi, the will forgotten, the grandchild a million miles away. The woman who had worked double shifts cataloging rare manuscripts at the Boston Public Library so he could attend Brown without a single loan was now being cataloged herself, an inventory of failings, a case file. And in that moment, something inside me didn't shatter, it crystallized. The soft maternal warmth I had nurtured for 40 years cooled into something hard, clear, and unbreakable. And the most devastating part wasn't just what I had heard. It was the sudden, horrifying clarity of realizing how long I had been ignoring the signs, not of my decline, but of his intent. If you've ever watched your own child slowly become a stranger in your own home, you know the particular chill I speak of. This was the day I stopped being a mother first and foremost, and started becoming a historian of my own survival. I didn't go back to the airport. I told the taxi driver to take me to the North End. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but my mind was a whirlwind of clicking microfilm and rustling parchment. I had him stop in front of a small Italian bakery on Hanover Street, a place Richard and I used to frequent back when we were young and lived in a tiny apartment with faulty heating. The bakery had been renovated, but the air still smelled of anise and burnt sugar. I ordered an espresso and sat at a small table by the window, letting the bitter heat of the coffee anchor me to the present. I watched people hurry by, their collars turned up against the wind, and I remembered Richard reading the paper at this very table, while a young Leo, his mind a ravenous machine of curiosity, built elaborate towers out of sugar packets. He'd wanted to know how suspension bridges worked, how skyscrapers didn't fall, how a city's unseen infrastructure functioned. I was the one who nurtured that curiosity. I brought him books from the library's engineering section, circling paragraphs on load-bearing walls and tensile strength. I drove him to robotics competitions. He was a builder then, not a demolitions expert. Somewhere between that brilliant boy and the man I just overheard, a fundamental shift had occurred. It hadn't been sudden. It had been a slow, creeping occupation. I saw it now with painful clarity. His insistence on handling Richard's estate, telling me it was too complex for me to worry about. His replacement of our trusted family accountant with a sleek, impersonal firm of his choosing. His quiet consolidation of my online passwords into a more secure system that he managed. Each act had been presented as a kindness, a son's loving concern for his aging mother. I had accepted them as such, basking in the warmth of his attention. A tired mother's trust, a widow's hope. Now those same acts rearranged themselves into a chilling blueprint of his strategy. I left the bakery, the taste of espresso, a bitter residue on my tongue. I wasn't ready to go home. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I needed to go to the one place where I had always felt powerful, where the chaos of the world was rendered into quiet, legible order. I needed to go to the archives. The grand vaulted ceilings of the Boston Public Library greeted me like an old friend. The familiar scent of aged paper and binding glue was a balm to my frayed nerves. I walked past the main reading room, my steps echoing on the marble floors, and headed to the rare books and manuscripts department in the back. The archives, my old kingdom. Everything was quieter, more digital, but the essential order remained. I nodded to the young archivist at a desk, a woman who couldn't have been older than Leo, and requested the file for Richard's estate. It was stored here for safekeeping, a common practice for university affiliates. She led me to a quiet corner table, and a few minutes later, a gray, acid-free archival box was placed before me. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid. The will itself was straightforward, but it was Richard's notes, his meticulous annotations that I was looking for. He had always thought on paper, his sharp, angular handwriting filling every margin. He had left me a map. I spread the pages under the soft light, and there it was. Beside the section detailing the distribution of assets, a sticky note, its adhesive long since dried, was clipped to the page. It said, "Eleonora, if you ever feel like you're in a fog, remember the numbers. The numbers don't have opinions." I turned to the final addendum, a detailed breakdown of our investments. Next to each entry was a coded annotation, ERV to retain, ERV or L if qualified, legal hold until independent audit, and the most damning of all, no full discretionary access to Sun without third-party review. Richard had been precise. He had foreseen a future where his son's ambition might curdle into something else. He hadn't warned me with words that might have broken my heart. He had protected me with clauses and conditions, trusting my intelligence to one day decipher them. A wave of heat rushed through me, not anger, but recognition, the feeling of slipping back into my own skin. I pulled a small moleskin notebook from my purse and began a list. 1. Contact Catherine. 2. Full cognitive evaluation. 3. Audit of all accounts. 4. Revoke POA. I underlined each item with a firm, steady hand. By the time I left the library, the sky had deepened to a bruised twilight blue. The cold air felt clean, sharp. I walked to the curb to hail a cab, my posture erect, my mind clear. I didn't feel 74. I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel like a case file to be managed. I felt like Eleanor Avance. the woman who had once identified a forged signature on a 17th-century manuscript and who would now meticulously document the attempted erasure of her own life. The next morning, I began my performance. I knew Leo would be back. He was building his case, and he would need more observations. I rummaged in the back of a closet and found a tiny digital voice recorder I used to use for oral history interviews. I tested it, saw the small red light blink once, and then tucked it deep within the soil of a large potted fern in the living room, its microphone aimed toward the sitting area. I left the front door unlocked, made tea, accidentally spilling a small puddle on the granite countertop and leaving it there. I pulled out the newspaper's crossword puzzle and filled in a few answers, deliberately getting one wrong. These were the breadcrumbs I would leave for him, the small signals of a mind beginning to fray. He arrived at 10, unannounced.
Catherine's daughter, Sophie, a graduate student in archival science, moved into the spare bedroom. She filled the house with the quiet hum of her laptop, the scent of fresh coffee, and the easy presence of someone who respects boundaries. She helped me digitize Richard's old photographs, her careful hands treating each one like a treasure. One evening, we sat in the library, the room where I had first overheard the plot against me. Sophie was labeling archival boxes. I was reading The Birking House. The house was no longer quiet, and neither was I. I had not disowned my son. I had simply removed him as the editor of my life. I had taken back the pen in my journal. That night, I wrote a final entry on the matter. There was no loud victory, no courtroom drama. There was only the quiet, irrefutable power of a well-documented truth. My story is my own. The archives are now closed.
Went to check the thermostat. The play had begun. He moved about the kitchen with a proprietary air, unpacking organic soup and gluten-free crackers. He asked how I was sleeping. I gave a meandering, non-committal answer, changing the subject halfway through. I let my hand tremble slightly as I stirred my tea. He watched me, his eyes missing nothing. He scanned the mail piled on the counter, singling out a letter from our investment firm. I told him I hadn't gotten around to opening it yet, that the numbers made my head swim these days. He offered so kindly to review it for me. I waved a hand and said later, perhaps after our soup. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression softening into one of profound gravity. This was the moment I was waiting for. He told me he'd been researching some assisted living communities. "Just options, Mom," he said, his voice a gentle caress. "Places with gardens, music programs, staff trained in memory care." He was painting a picture of a gilded cage, and he said it as if he were offering me a gift. I blinked, feigning a slow, confused thought process. I smiled faintly. "It might be nice," I said, "to have someone else do the cooking." Then I looked at him, my eyes wide with manufactured innocence, and asked, "What day is it today, dear?" I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, the final piece of his narrative clicking into place. After he left, I retrieved the recorder from the fern. I sat in Richard's study, the door locked, and listened to the entire conversation, every word, every carefully placed pause, every condescendingly gentle inquiry. I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, clean sense of purpose. I now had more than a memory of betrayal. I had a primary source document. That afternoon I found Catherine's number in an old leather-bound address book. We had worked together at the library for 20 years before she left to practice estate law. She was fiercely intelligent and had zero tolerance for nonsense. I left a message. My voice was calm and direct. "Catherine, it's Eleanor Evans. I need a legal mind I can trust. It's personal." She was at my house by 4. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She sat at my kitchen table, her presence filling the room, and I slid the recorder and a copy of Richard's annotated will across to her. She listened to the recording in its entirety, her expression unreadable. When it was finished, she looked at me and said 5 simple words. "We are going to fix this." She opened her laptop, and her fingers began to fly across the keyboard. She explained the process with the clarity of a seasoned general laying out a battle plan. First, we would immediately revoke Leo's existing power of attorney. Second, we would draft a new ironclad will and a living trust designating a trusted executor. Fourth, we would get a full, documented cognitive evaluation from a top neurologist at Mass General. "Everything Grant assumed you've forgotten," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "We are about to rewrite in permanent ink." Before she left, she placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was the formal revocation of Leo's POA. I signed my name, my hand not shaking in the slightest. She slid the document into her briefcase. "This," she said, "is the first move. From now on, he's no longer playing with a novice. He's playing against a grandmaster." The days that followed were a master class in quiet, methodical warfare. Catherine had given me a checklist, but I barely needed it. The archivist in me took over, and I began to assemble my own counterfile, my own irrefutable collection of evidence. My first stop was my longtime physician, Dr. Albright. I requested a full cognitive assessment. "Is everything all right, Eleanor?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Everything is fine," I replied. "I just require a baseline for my personal records." He conducted the tests, and at the end he handed me a signed letter stating I was cognitively sound with memory and reasoning skills well above average for her age. I filed it away. Exhibit A. I began documenting my life with the meticulousness of a historian. I saved grocery receipts and cross-referenced them with my bank statements, making notes in the margins. I printed out complex email exchanges with my book club about Proust. I scanned every page into the encrypted cloud storage Catherine had set up for me. Each file saved with a timestamp, each document a small, sharp stone in the wall I was building. One afternoon, in the back of Richard's closet, I found a small box labeled Correspondence. Inside, among letters from his university days, was a single, folded sheet of paper dated 10 years prior. It wasn't the letter, but a note to himself. It read, "If the day ever comes that Leo's ambition eclipses his empathy, remember that Eleanor's quietness is not a lack of strength, but a withholding of it. She sees everything." I sat on the edge of our bed, the note in my hand, the house utterly still. Richard knew, not the specifics, but the potential. He had seen the fault line in our son's character, and he had left me this final posthumous validation. I was not imagining things. I was not overreacting. I was seeing everything. Leo showed up 2 days later, on a Wednesday. The doorbell rang just after noon. I took a slow, deliberate breath before opening the door. He stood there with a small bouquet of grocery store daisies and that same soft, practiced smile. He was here to gather more data for his file. I let him in. He brought soup. We sat at the kitchen table. He asked about my sleep. I told him some nights were better than others. He watched my hands as I stirred my soup, looking for a tremor that wasn't there. Then he began to speak about the care communities again, this time with a brochure. He spoke of wellness programs and managed care. He said he just wanted what was best for me, that it wasn't safe to be alone so much. "I've spoken with Mr. Davies again," he said gently. "He thinks we can get the paperwork expedited if we file this week. He just needs a final statement of concern." I let a long pause stretch between us. The recorder on the bookshelf was catching every syllable. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him. "Perhaps," I said, my voice soft. "I will consider it." His face relaxed into a subtle expression of relief. He thought he was winning. After he left, I watched him in front of the window as he sat in his car, typing furiously into his phone. He was likely composing his statement of concern right now, filled with the manufactured evidence I had just so carefully provided. I turned from the window and walked into the study. I uploaded the new audio file and labeled it Visit 3, Expedited Paperwork Discussion. The performance was nearly complete, but so was the record. 3 days later, Catherine delivered our response. It was not a letter. It was a dossier. It was hand-delivered by a courier to Mr. Davies' downtown office. It contained the signed affidavit from Dr. Albright, the newly notarized power of attorney naming Catherine as my legal agent, the updated will, and a concise, chilling cover letter. The letter stated that any further attempts to file for guardianship would be met with a lawsuit for elder coercion and malicious prosecution, and that all recorded evidence had been securely archived. It was a shield, but it was also a sword. That evening, Catherine called. Her voice was calm. "Mr. Davies contacted me personally," she said. "He is formally withdrawing from the case. He said to tell you that he remembers your husband fondly and that he will not be a party to this." The crack in Leo's wall had just become a chasm. The final confrontation came without warning. He used his old key to let himself in. I heard the lock turn and found him standing in the hallway, his face a thunderous mask of rage and disbelief. The UC sun was gone. This was the raw, entitled